Imagine a world where your phone was chained to the kitchen wall, where Friday nights meant rewinding VHS tapes, and where kids actually traded cardboard Pokemon cards like Wall Street brokers. The 1990s weren't just another decade. They were the last gasp before everything went digital. Gas was $1, Blockbuster was king, and AOL promised you 1,000 free hours of the internet you barely understood. We didn't realize it then, but the world we thought was permanent was already slipping away. This is the story of 100 forgotten things from 1990s America, a time that feels like yesterday, yet vanishes more every year. In the 1990s, money carried a different weight. It wasn't invisible digits glowing on a screen, it was folded bills in a wallet, a paper paycheck tucked in an envelope, and coins jingling in your pocket. Every other Friday, you walked into the bank, paycheck in hand, waiting in line beneath humming fluorescent lights. The teller smiled, stamped your deposit slip, and handed you crisp 20s for the weekend. People budgeted with actual checkbooks, scratching numbers in neat columns, balancing to the penny. There was something solid about it, something reassuring. Back then, the numbers felt possible. The average salary hovered around $25,000 a year. A house in the suburbs could be had for about $120,000, and a new car might set you back 15 grand. Gas floated just over $1 a gallon. These weren't pocket change numbers, but they weren't crushing either. Families survived on a single income, and it didn't feel like a miracle. One paycheck could stretch to cover the mortgage, groceries, gas, and still leave enough for Friday night pizza or a night at the movies. Things weren't easy, but they felt doable. Like the American dream still had its boots on, walking beside you instead of slipping out of reach. Grocery shopping felt different too. $50 could fill a cart with enough cereal, milk, and snacks to last the week. Kids tugged at sleeves in the checkout aisle, begging for fruit roll-ups or gushers, and sometimes parents caved, because it didn't mean something else had to be sacrificed. Coupons clipped from the Sunday paper weren't about desperation, they were about pride, about being smart with money. People carried quarters for vending machines, dimes for payphones, and singles for tip jars. Cash wasn't a backup plan. It was the default. Credit cards existed, but they weren't lifelines. They were for emergencies, big purchases, or maybe booking a vacation. Most stores still stamped carbons onto flimsy paper slips when you swiped. Paying with plastic was a moment you remembered, not a daily reflex. If you wanted a new sofa, you put it on layaway at Sears or Kmart. You made small payments each week until finally, the item was yours to take home. Picking it up wasn't just shopping, it was a victory, a slow and steady celebration of patience and discipline. The culture around money carried an invisible calm. Parents weren't scrolling through apps to track every cent. They knew what they had and what they could afford. The rhythm was steady. Bills showed up in the mail, paid with checks dropped back in the mailbox, stamped and sealed. The mailbox itself was a kind of lifeline, filled with bills, catalogs, and the occasional handwritten letter. Money moved slower, but it also felt more controlled, less slippery. There wasn't abundance, but there was balance. Families weren't buying lattes on the way to work or tapping phones at checkout counters. They packed lunches, drank home-brewed coffee, and considered dinners out to be events, not routines. Nobody felt rich, but most felt stable. And stability was its own kind of wealth. The sense that as long as you worked, you could keep your home, your car, your life. Looking back, when money felt real wasn't about how much people had. It was about the rhythm of living in a world where money was visible, physical, and steady. A paycheck didn't just hit your account, it landed in your hand. Every dollar meant something, and for a moment in the 1990s, that felt like enough. For kids and teenagers in the 1990s, the mall wasn't just a shopping center. It was an entire universe. It was where fashion, food, friendship, and freedom collided under one fluorescent sky. Parents treated it like an errand, but for us, it was a pilgrimage. Getting dropped off at the sliding glass doors with $10 or $20 in your pocket felt like stepping into your own world. No permission slips required. The moment you walked inside, the air shifted. The smell of buttery pretzels from Auntie Anne's mixed with the faint sweetness of Cinnabon, and the sharp scent of new sneakers at Foot Locker. Neon signs buzzed overhead while tiled floors echoed with 100 different conversations. The mall fountain glittered in the center, filled with coins and whispered wishes, a landmark where kids met up before circling the same hallways a dozen times. Arcades were the beating heart of the mall for kids who couldn't care less about shopping. They glowed like alien spaceships, stuffed with flashing machines and the metallic clang of quarters. Street Fighter II battles drew small crowds, while pinball machines clattered under the tilt of eager palms. If you had a roll of quarters in your pocket, you were set for the afternoon. If you ran out, you loitered by the machines, watching and waiting, hoping someone would hand you a spare coin. For teens, the food court was more than just a place to eat. It was a stage. Pizza slices bigger than your face, orange Julius cups dripping condensation, trays of greasy fries shared between friends. Groups gathered at sticky tables, pretending not to watch each other, while secretly judging who was cool enough to sit in the center. A tray of fries became communal currency. Share them with the right person, and you weren't just eating, you were making alliances. Fashion ruled the mall. Spencer's gifts lured kids with lava lamps, prank gifts, and posters their parents didn't approve of. Hot Topic was a temple of blacklight band tees, chains, and rebellion, while the Gap and Abercrombie churned out the looks that defined the decade. What you wore on Monday often came from what you bought on Saturday. A single bag swinging from your hand wasn't just merchandise, it was proof of belonging. Music lived at Sam Goody or FYE, where walls of CDs stretched endlessly. Clunky headphones at listening stations gave you a sneak peek before you bought, and flipping through jewel cases felt like handling relics. Choosing an album meant commitment. You didn't just click, shuffle. You lived with that record for weeks. Walking out with a brand new CD felt like holding the soundtrack to your entire identity. The mall was also about freedom disguised as waiting. Parents wandered into Sears, JCPenney, or Macy's, disappearing into endless racks of clothes while kids were left to roam. You could spend hours circling the same loop, running into classmates, dodging mall cops, and stopping at the same fountain to regroup. Time moved slower, but in the best way. By evening, bags rustled, feet ached, and kids clutched pretzel salt on their fingertips as they headed for the exit. The automatic doors whooshed open, spilling you back into the real world. For one afternoon, though, you'd lived in the mall's orbit, a place where friendship, fashion, and food courts ruled everything. For a generation growing up before social media, the mall was more than a building. It was a universe, and for a while it felt endless. Friday nights in the 1990s had a rhythm, and at the center of it was Blockbuster. Families didn't just pick a movie. They made an event out of it, piling into the car after dinner, driving through the glow of neon blue and yellow signs, and pushing through those glass doors felt like crossing into another world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the aisles stretched forever, and the shelves were stacked with possibility. Blockbuster wasn't just a store, it was a ritual. The first stop was always the new release wall. Posters of Titanic, The Matrix, or Jurassic Park loomed above rows of plastic VHS cases. You'd grab a display box and head to the shelf behind it, heart pounding, hoping there was still a copy left. If the space was empty, disappointment hit hard. But finding that last tape felt like striking gold. Kids celebrated with a victory dance, parents sighed with relief, and everyone knew the night's entertainment was secure. Inside, the aisles divided the family. Dad wandered into the action section, fingers brushing across titles like Die Hard or Speed. Mom drifted toward dramas or rom-coms, flipping cases over to read summaries. Kids darted to the animated shelves or begged for the latest Disney release. Negotiations began, whispered deals and small compromises that somehow always ended with a mix. One for the parents, one for the kids, and sometimes a guilty pleasure comedy in the middle. The snack counter was half the fun. Blockbuster popcorn tubs, oversized boxes of Milk Duds, or a bag of Twizzlers turned movie night into a full theater experience at home. Parents groaned at the prices, but kids begged anyway, clutching the candy like it was part of the rental package. The checkout line buzzed with the sounds of rewinding machines humming behind the counter, tapes being scanned and clerks reminding everyone of the same golden rule: be kind, rewind. Rewinding wasn't optional, it was sacred. Forget to rewind, and you risked the wrath of the next renter, or worse, a scolding at the counter. Those yellow "please rewind" stickers became little warnings from a forgotten era. And then, of course, there were the dreaded late fees. A $5 rental could balloon into 20. Back home, the ritual continued. The tape slid into the VCR with a satisfying click. The screen flickered, and the previews rolled. Families piled onto couches, blankets tucked in, popcorn bowls balanced dangerously on knees. For 2 hours, the living room transformed into a private movie theater. If the movie was good, you watched it twice before it was due back. If it was bad, well, at least you still had the candy. Blockbuster wasn't just about movies, it was about the ritual of choosing together. The debates in the aisles, the suspense of finding the right tape, the collective sigh when the previews ended and the feature began. In a world before streaming, Friday nights had weight. You didn't scroll endlessly, you made a choice, and that choice defined the night. Looking back, Blockbuster wasn't just a store. It was a stage for family arguments, laughter, and compromise. It was the thrill of new releases, the sting of late fees, and the comfort of knowing that, at least for tonight, the perfect movie was waiting for you at home. If childhood in the 1990s had a flavor, it was sugar, bright, neon, and just a little chaotic. Lunchrooms, cafeterias, and playgrounds weren't just places to eat. They were battlegrounds where snacks defined your status. Opening a lunchbox was like revealing your hand in a game of poker. A plain PB&J with carrot sticks? You were just another kid. But pull out Dunkaroos, Gushers, or a Capri Sun and suddenly you had power. Snacks weren't just food, they were social currency. Dunkaroos were the crown jewel. Tiny kangaroo-shaped cookies with their own little tub of frosting. They turned dessert into a luxury experience. Some kids dipped carefully, rationing their frosting like misers, while others dunked so aggressively they finished the frosting halfway through. Having a pack of Dunkaroos made you instantly popular, even if just for 10 minutes, because everyone wanted a taste of that neon sugar high. They were traded, begged for, and occasionally stolen, because no cafeteria hierarchy was complete without them. Then there were Capri Suns, the ultimate test of patience and precision. Each silver pouch was an adventure. Hit the designated circle perfectly with the straw and you felt like a surgeon. Miss, and you stabbed through the back, spraying juice across the table while your friends laughed. Still, nothing beat sipping from that icy pouch. The straw bent like a flag of victory, while condensation chilled your hand. Capri Suns weren't just drinks. They were memories sealed in foil. Gushers, though, were pure spectacle. The commercials promised an explosion, and kids lived for that moment when the syrupy filling burst out. Bite into one, and the cafeteria became a theater of exaggerated woe faces. They weren't just candy. They were a performance, a chance to get a reaction, to be the kid who had the snack everyone else envied. A pack of Gushers could buy you a week of friendship, or at least one good trade for chips or cookies. And then there was Surge, the soda that felt almost dangerous. Bright green, sugar-charged, and marketed like rocket fuel, it became a legend on playgrounds. Parents hated it. Teachers banned it from classrooms, but kids loved it for exactly those reasons. Drinking a Surge at lunch made you feel like a rebel, even if the wildest thing you did afterward was trade Pokemon cards. Of course, not every snack was flashy. Fruit roll-ups unspooled into sticky tapes of sugar that wrapped around fingers like candy bandages. Lunchables turned every kid into a mini-chef, stacking tiny crackers, meat slices, and squares of plastic-like cheese into creations that felt gourmet at the time. Even the simpler ones, bags of Doritos, packs of Oreos, or the occasional Hostess Twinkie, carried their own weight. Snacks weren't equal, but every one of them was a ticket to belonging. Looking back, the 1990s lunchbox wasn't about nutrition, it was about identity. Snacks defined you more than the shoes you wore or the backpack you carried. They were small, edible symbols of childhood freedom, rebellion, and fun. To this day, a single bite of a gusher or the crinkle of a Capri Sun pouch can transport you straight back to a noisy cafeteria where everything that mattered fit inside a plastic lunchbox. In the 1990s, Saturday mornings weren't just another stretch of weekend. They were sacred. Kids who groaned about early alarms on school days somehow woke up at dawn without anyone telling them to. Pajamas still wrinkled, hair wild, they crept into living rooms where the TV glow cut through the quiet. The ritual was universal. Plop down on the carpet, grab the remote, and prepare for hours of animated magic. Saturday mornings were a religion, and every kid was a believer. The networks treated those hours like gold. Fox Kids, WB, Nickelodeon, and ABC each stacked their lineups with shows that defined a generation. Power Rangers morphing into action, X-Men storming across battlefields, Rugrats causing toddler chaos, and Animaniacs singing their way into mayhem. Each show carried its own theme song, catchy enough that you can still hum it today. The programming wasn't just entertainment. It was a shared language. Monday mornings at school, playground conversations began with, "Did you see it?" If you missed an episode, you weren't just behind, you were left out. Cereal was the fuel for this sacred time. Every kid had their favorite. Lucky Charms, Cocoa Puffs, Fruity Pebbles, or Captain Crunch poured into bowls that were way too big. Milk splashed over the edges, spoons clinked against glass, and neon-colored cereal dust turned the leftover milk into liquid candy. No parent had to remind you to eat breakfast on Saturdays. You sat cross-legged in front of the screen, spoon in one hand, remote in the other, locked into sugary bliss while cartoons rolled endlessly. Commercials were almost as important as the shows themselves. Nerf guns that promised backyard battles, Polly Pocket playsets unfolding like tiny kingdoms, Crossfire board game ads that screamed with rock music intensity. Every toy was the coolest thing ever, and kids across America believed it. Saturday morning programming wasn't just entertainment, it was marketing disguised as childhood. And it worked, because those commercials still echo in memory as vividly as the shows they interrupted. Parents, meanwhile, cherished the peace. For a few hours each weekend, the house was quiet. Kids weren't fighting, whining, or asking for rides. They were glued to the screen, hypnotized by the cartoons. Some parents stayed in bed, others brewed coffee and flipped through the paper. But all of them understood the magic. Saturday mornings brought them freedom. The most important rule of Saturday morning religion was that it only happened once. There were no DVRs, no streaming platforms, no watch it later. If you missed an episode of Batman, the animated series, or Pokemon, it was gone until reruns months later, if you were lucky. That fragility made it special. Every Saturday carried the weight of one-time-only magic, and kids treated it with reverence. By late morning, the spell broke. Cartoons gave way to infomercials or golf, and kids were ushered outside to ride bikes or play tag. But those golden hours were untouchable, a weekly holiday built on cereal, cartoons, and shared laughter. Looking back, Saturday morning religion wasn't just about the shows, it was about belonging to a secret, nationwide congregation of kids who all tuned in at the same time. If the 1990s had a soundtrack, part of it was the screeching, static-filled handshake of dial-up internet. To kids and parents alike, it sounded less like technology and more like an alien invasion. Metallic shrieks, beeps, and robotic whirs echoing through the house phone line. You sat there waiting, holding your breath, praying no one picked up the other handset in the kitchen, because if they did, your precious connection vanished in an instant, and the cycle began again. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also the sound of the future arriving. The internet itself felt like stepping into uncharted territory. You clicked into AOL chat rooms, where screen names like Cool Guy 92 or Princess Star 87 floated by, strangers talking about everything and nothing. The chat window glowed like a portal to another galaxy. Except your mom could still yell, "Dinner's ready," down the hall. Sending an email felt futuristic, even if the subject line was just a chain letter that promised bad luck if you didn't forward it to 10 friends. The world was suddenly bigger, yet it still fit on the family computer desk shoved into the corner of the living room. Computers themselves carried a kind of magic. Installing Windows 95 meant hours of anticipation, swapping out floppy disks like sacred relics. When that colorful cloud logo finally swirled onto the screen, it was like stepping into science fiction. Solitaire became more than a card game. It was proof that you were living in the digital age. Even the way we saved and shared information felt like alchemy. Floppy disks with their fragile plastic shells held your school essays, saved game files, or maybe a carefully curated list of favorite jokes copied from the early web. Later, burning CDs felt revolutionary. Hours went into crafting the perfect playlist, labeling it Road Trip or Summer Mix 99, and guarding it like treasure. If the process failed at 98%, you started over, but the result felt priceless, a soundtrack you built with your own hands. The internet's slowness was part of the ritual. Downloading a single image took 20 minutes, each line of pixels crawling onto the screen like a digital sunrise. Entire families took turns because the phone line couldn't be tied up forever. Someone always complained, "I need to make a call." And suddenly your precious download stalled at 47%. The frustration was real, but so was the wonder. Just knowing you could reach out across the world, even if it took half an hour, felt unbelievable. Technology wasn't sleek then. It was bulky, noisy, and demanding. But it carried a personality almost alive. The hum of a monitor, the clicking of keys, the shuffling of floppy disks, the alien screech of a modem. They weren't just sounds. They were rituals. They marked the beginning of something enormous, even if we didn't fully grasp it at the time. Looking back, technology in the 90s didn't feel invisible the way it does now. It was present, physical and loud, an alien guest in the corner of every living room. We didn't realize it then, but those strange sounds and awkward machines were the first whispers of the future. And for a while, they made us feel like pioneers. The 1990s didn't just entertain us, they shook the ground beneath our feet. Pop culture in that decade wasn't background noise. It was an earthquake that everyone felt at the same time. You didn't discover it alone in your feed. You lived it together as a nation, sometimes even as a world. Whether it was a movie, a song, or an athlete, these cultural quakes left cracks that still echo today. Take Titanic, for example. James Cameron's 3-hour epic wasn't just a film, it was a cultural tidal wave. Lines wrapped around theaters, kids memorized dialogue, and Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On played on repeat until radios practically begged for mercy. People didn't just see it once. They went back, sometimes half a dozen times, just to feel the heartbreak all over again. The sight of Jack and Rose on that doomed ship became a global obsession. Everyone knew the line, "I'll never let go," even if, ironically, she did. Then there was Jurassic Park. The summer it hit theaters, dinosaurs became real. The water glass trembling on the Jeep dashboard, the T-Rex roaring in Dolby surround sound. Those moments were burned into memory. Kids left theaters convinced velociraptors lurked in their kitchens. Toy aisles exploded with plastic dinosaurs. Lunchboxes bore T-Rex jaws. And suddenly, science class felt a little more exciting. Spielberg didn't just make a movie. He reset our imaginations. And who could forget Michael Jordan? The man wasn't just an athlete, he was a cultural monolith. 6 championship rings, tongue out mid-jump, a fadeaway jumper that seemed written by gravity itself. Every kid lowered their driveway hoop, laced up imitation Air Jordans, and shouted, "He's on fire!" like the NBA Jam arcade game. Even people who didn't watch basketball knew what a three-peat was. Jordan blurred the line between sports and myth, turning sneakers into icons and championships into collective memory. Music had its own quakes. Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit didn't just chart, it detonated, blasting grunge into every garage and high school hallway. Suddenly, flannel shirts and messy hair weren't sloppy, they were rebellion. Meanwhile, boy bands like Backstreet Boys and NSYNC ruled the airwaves, while Britney Spears danced in schoolgirl outfits that defined MTV. Pop wasn't just music, it was a movement. Choreographed, packaged, and screamed for by millions, and then came Napster. For decades, music belonged to record stores, CDs, and radio stations. Then suddenly, in the late 90s, A teenager with a modem could download songs for free. Entire libraries of music appeared overnight, and kids felt like digital pirates with infinite treasure. Record labels panicked, Metallica raged, but for the first time music felt unchained. Napster cracked the old system wide open, paving the way for the digital revolution. Pop culture in the 1990s didn't just give us entertainment, it gave us shared earthquakes. Movies, music, sports, they were events everyone talked about, argued over, and lived through together. In an era before endless content, when something big hit, it hit everyone. The ground shook, the culture shifted, and we were all standing on it at the same time. If childhood in the 1990s had guardians, they weren't parents or teachers, they were toys. These weren't just plastic distractions, they were companions, status symbols, and in some cases full-blown obsessions. They beeped at us in math class, glowed in the dark, and demanded more attention than some pets. Looking back, toys weren't just entertainment. They raised us. Take the Tamagotchi, for example. That tiny egg-shaped device was a digital pet with the emotional needs of a newborn. You fed it pixelated meals, cleaned up after its pixelated poop, and panicked when it beeped during class. Forget about it for 6 hours, and you returned to a tiny tombstone. Kids cried, restarted, and vowed to be better parents next time. For many, Tamagotchis were their first taste of responsibility and their first taste of heartbreak. Then there were Furby dolls, those big-eyed, furry little aliens that somehow became a phenomenon. They chirped, they laughed, they repeated words in garbled tones, and worst of all, they didn't always stop when you turned them off. Parents swore they whispered in the middle of the night. Some kids loved them, some buried them in closets, but everyone remembered the eerie giggle of a Furby at 3 a.m. Meanwhile, Pokemon cards transformed playgrounds into trading floors. A holographic Charizard wasn't just cardboard, it was a crown jewel, a ticket to playground royalty. Kids traded, battled, and sometimes cried when mom accidentally washed an entire deck in the pocket of a pair of jeans. Gotta catch 'em all wasn't just a slogan, it was a mission. One that turned recess into a stock exchange where every kid was a hustler. Not to be outdone, Beanie Babies turned kids and parents alike into collectors. Tiny plush animals with heart-shaped tags were suddenly investments. People camped outside Hallmark stores, hoarded rare editions, and whispered rumors that certain bears would pay for college tuition one day. Spoiler alert, they didn't. But the frenzy was real, and for a brief, glorious moment, polyester stuffing felt like treasure. And then there was the Super Soaker, the ultimate weapon of summer. Pump it 10 times, feel the tank swell, and unleash a stream of water so powerful it left cheap squirt guns in shame. Backyard battles became full-on wars. Alliances formed and dissolved, and siblings ran for cover. A bright neon Super Soaker wasn't just a toy, it was dominance. Of course, not every toy was flashy. Lego sets turned living rooms into construction zones. Skippets wrapped ankles in plastic bruises. Pogs clattered across cafeteria tables, and whoever had the heaviest slammer ruled the day. Even simple toys carried weight, shaping who we played with, how we competed, and what stories we told ourselves in play. Looking back, the toys of the 90s weren't just objects on shelves. They were teachers of responsibility, symbols of popularity, and tools for imagination. They chirped, beeped, roared, and soaked us until we collapsed in laughter. In a world before smartphones, toys raised us. And in their own strange way, they did a pretty good job. Before smartphones, before Alexa reminders, before endless group texts, family life in the 1990s ran on paper, magnets, and memory. It was noisy, messy, and wonderfully human. The rhythms of the home weren't dictated by screens, but by routines you could touch, hear, and sometimes smell. Looking back, everything about family life felt slower, less efficient maybe, but more alive. The refrigerator was the command center. Stuck with magnets shaped like fruit or cartoon characters, it held the family calendar, school permission slips, and the occasional A+ spelling test proudly displayed. Dry erase calendars and sticky notes tracked birthdays, soccer practice, and dentist appointments. If your name wasn't on that fridge, you didn't have permission. Families gathered around it daily, treating it like a bulletin board of life, equal parts schedule, reminder system, and trophy case. Takeout menus had their own sacred drawer. Folded, greasy, and crinkled at the edges, they were the real-life version of food apps. You flipped through them to decide if it was pizza night, Chinese takeout, or maybe subs from the deli. Some menus had coupons scribbled on, others had phone numbers circled. Technology at home was clunky but communal. Remote controls lived in wooden caddies, carefully organized by dads who swore there was a system. Lose the VCR remote and movie night was chaos. Overhead projectors in classrooms hummed like miniature engines, their plastic sheets still faintly smudged from last week's math lesson. If a teacher left the transparency uncleaned, it haunted the next class period like a ghost of equations past. Analog life meant mistakes and imperfections left visible trails, but no one minded. They were part of the rhythm. Even communication had its own analog rituals. Landline phones were tethered to kitchen walls with cords that stretched dangerously across the floor. Pages beeped with cryptic codes. 911 meant urgent. 143 meant, I love you. Kids begged for their own phone line, and some lucky ones got it. When a call came in, the whole family knew someone would shout, "It's for you." And privacy meant stretching the cord into the hallway while your siblings listened anyway. Entertainment was just as tangible. Family TV nights depended on everyone being in the living room at the same time, or else you missed the show. Thursdays meant must-see TV on NBC, and laughter from Friends or Seinfeld rippled across the entire country in sync. Board games like Monopoly and Life sat stacked in closets, their cardboard boxes worn, their dice forever missing one piece. Playing together wasn't scheduled, it just happened. Filling long evenings with laughter, arguments, and someone inevitably flipping the board in defeat. Family life in the 1990s was analog because it had to be, but also because it worked. The fridge kept order, the phone rang out loud, the calendar shouted reminders in ink instead of push notifications. It was imperfect, yes, but that imperfection gave it charm. The noise, the clutter, the visible reminders on paper and magnet, those were the textures of family life. Without digital shortcuts, families leaned on each other more. And in that leaning, they found connection. The 1990s were the last stretch of innocence before the world shifted forever. It's hard to explain now, but there was a lightness in the air. A sense that life wasn't watched, measured, or constantly on edge. Airports, neighborhoods, and even headlines carried a different rhythm, one that ended abruptly. On a clear September morning in 2001, remember the 90s is to remember the world before everything changed. Airports are the clearest example. Back then, you could walk all the way to the gate without a ticket. Families hugged goodbye at the jet bridge, waving until the very last second as loved ones boarded the plane. Kids pressed their faces against the windows, watching engines roar, while parents lingered at the terminal, waving as if they were in a movie. Security was barely more than a metal detector, and nobody thought twice about it. Travel felt personal, warm, almost romantic. Planes weren't lockdown fortresses. They were vehicles of connection. Even daily life felt less guarded. Children roamed neighborhoods on bikes until the streetlights flickered on. Parents worried, of course, but the culture allowed freedom, not constant tracking. Payphones on street corners connected kids to home if needed, and pocket change jingled just in case. School drills prepared students for fires or maybe tornadoes, not for lockdowns. The idea of constant danger wasn't baked into childhood yet. The news cycle moved slower, too. Major events like the O.J. Simpson trial or Y2K panic dominated for weeks, but they still felt like curiosities more than existential threats. Television was where most people learned what was happening, and anchors delivered it with a calm authority. There was no flood of breaking news notifications, no endless online commentary amplifying fear. Problems existed, yes, but they didn't feel like they followed you into every corner of daily life. Even politics carried a different energy. The Cold War had ended. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and Americans believed they were living in a more secure, triumphant age. There was tension overseas, but at home, the prevailing mood was one of stability. Kids grew up with the sense that the world, while imperfect, wasn't fragile. The looming shadow of global terrorism hadn't yet entered the public consciousness. What stands out most, though, was the freedom of not being watched all the time. No cell phone cameras at every corner, no constant online tracking, no digital record of every mistake. Privacy was the default. Families documented life with camcorders and disposable cameras, not surveillance systems. If something embarrassing happened, it lived only in memory, not in viral videos. Life felt freer because it wasn't constantly observed. When 9/11 happened, that entire atmosphere vanished. Airports became fortified. Fear entered schools, politics, and daily life. Security replaced ease and suspicion replaced trust. The innocence of the 90s wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it disappeared almost overnight. Looking back, the 1990s weren't just about toys, TV shows, or technology. They were about a way of life that felt lighter, less burdened, less fearful. The world before 9/11 was imperfect, but it carried a rare kind of optimism, one that's hard to imagine now. And maybe that's why we hold on to it so tightly. It wasn't just another decade. It was the last moment before everything changed. If this trip down memory lane hit you with nostalgia, don't forget to like,